Duan and I are really excited to be able to show you all this home. This is a beautiful property in La Jolla, California, and we were lucky enough to be engaged by our clients, a couple that had a really strong vision for what the property could do. And although they had three architects before we showed up, we were finally able to produce a vision that met theirs and executed on a very high level. And so it's fun to be able to do that. So yes, I'm Grant Kirkpatrick. I started KAA Design a little over 30 years ago, and between myself, Duan, and my partner, and our other partner, Eric Evans, we run a firm here in West Los Angeles focused just on custom residential work. So we're able to hone in and really explore this craft in the passionate way that we like to work. But of course, it's not just us. As you guys all know, these projects take a small army to put together. And hopefully during this presentation, and before we open it up to some Q&A, we'll identify the village that comes together to actually realize great things like these. But in terms of our own team, between Duan and myself, and also Phil Grosher, our lead project manager, a fabulous architect who was heavily invested into this project. We also had Michael McGowan, our landscape architect. We actually had a trio of three landscape architects on the project. Greg Hubert, who was also local to the project, and then Damon Hine of Make Ground. And, Damon goes way back with us. He used to lead our landscape studio and is a phenomenally talented gentleman. And then we also have some other folks that we'll bring up as we move along. But yeah, so just getting into a little bit the history of this property is very interesting. This is a hilltop up on the hill overlooking La Jolla Village. So it's not down on the beach. It's about a mile plus up on the hill. And because this is sort of the crown of the hill in that neighborhood, this used to be a tree farm. It was actually a nursery for growing all types of both native and non-native trees in California. And over the decades, the tree farm subsided and turned into a residential neighborhood. And this 2-acre property was kind of the heart of it. So we inherited some very important and magnificent trees, some specimen trees that were really quite dramatic. And it was always the intent for both the owners and ourselves to really keep the trees as the priority. Trees first, and weaving life and architecture in between came second. So you'll see that as a basic theme as we move through this. The neighborhood is a beautiful suburban neighborhood with most homes sharing a view over the Pacific Ocean. What's interesting, we'll talk about this a little bit later, is the house that existed on this property and where our clients raised 3 kids for the better part of 30 years was a very traditional home. So if we move to the next slide, we can see that in this aerial view, the gray roof with the pool is the home that preceded our project. And the approach to this house, the tennis court, all those kinds of things were reconsidered based on how we thought the property could be maximized. If we move to the next slide, we'll see that these large oaks, in particular, these cork oaks, were really just dominant centuries-old trees that have quite a presence. And although the old sort of French provincial home, they intended to do something really quite new here. So we treated this as a blank slate with the exception of the major trees. On this next photograph, we'll see one of the more magnificent trees. This cork oak is a really rare and healthy specimen. So a cork oak is what they actually make corks out of. They're very prolific to Europe, mainly Spain, but also France and Italy. But most corks for wine bottles are made from the bark of the cork oak tree. This case, this particular cork oak is about 8 feet at the diameter that you see there at the base, and over 100 feet in its canopy. So really substantial tree. And although the house that existed here that you can see was very close to the tree, it also didn't. The tree was still there before, and so we rather respected that. On the next slide, you'll see that there's also there were two other cork oaks, not as large, but for all intents and purposes, just as special. And we did not move these trees. We actually worked within them. And as Duan will tell us, we worked with them heavily during the design stage, and they were very well respected during construction. And this next slide is just a close-up detail of the cork itself. Cork oak trees are rather spongy. If you push on the cork, they give. It's not a hard bark, and it can be anywhere from 4 to 8 inches thick. So it's a really amazing species of oak, amazing trees, and you'll see not just in terms of their placement, but even the texture and the colors of the cork oak were important to us in the development of the design. Duan, do you want to take us to the site prep?
Yeah, so thanks, Grant. So as you guys can imagine, as we kind of got started on the project, the act of getting the site prepped and even demolishing the house was a mini project in itself. Given the proximity of the structure of the home and the longevity of the trees and just the sensitivity that we wouldn't want to do anything that would disrupt that or at least put in jeopardy the health of the trees. This was a photo here that we took early on the project, probably after 2 to 3 months of demolition. And as many of you probably know, just in your own experiences, demolition can happen pretty quickly, at least with the structure of the home, within a week or so. But with this particular case, the clients opted to go for deconstruction, which is a little bit more of a sensitive undertaking of literally pulling apart the house in bits and pieces in a way that was very sensitive and just didn't suggest taking a bulldozer and blowing the whole thing down. And that was just the way that we needed to handle this thing, given the sensitivity in terms of where the trees were and where the existing house was. This again photo was taken early on in the process, and you can see probably right there in the middle is the big cork oak that Grant was referring to. And as you can see in the next slide, the mini project within the project was literally protecting this tree. So very early on, we engaged an arborist who literally became part of the family to take part in just caring and maintaining this tree over the course of the early part of construction, and set in line a whole series of guidelines, as you can imagine, that included when this thing needed to be watered, who could come up close to it. They didn't want any paint or any additional water, or it needed to be hosed off every day after construction, just to ensure again that the health of the tree was affected by all the residual dust and everything else and of what was going on with a particular site. With the next slide, this was a photo that was taken early in construction. And what was really interesting, again, is just with the sensitivity to the health of the trees, is that we worked really closely with the structural engineer at that point in time to come up with a structural system that was actually going to be very forgiving for us as we got into the process. As you can imagine, because we were taking a real risk with where the location of the house was and literally threading it through the 2 primary cork trees that were there, we needed to come up with a structural system that would allow us to almost on site be able to modify and change the angles where some of the major structural elements were. So what you see here is the main body of the house, which is in the red steel, literally bifurcating the 2 primary cork trees, and being able to kind of work through that. Even within the foundation system, although not this particular area, this area in front of the foreground is a little more of a typical foundation system. As we got closer to the tree, we actually had to adhere to almost a pure foundation system that would allow for the concrete footings to be able to kind of work around the tree roots of those cork trees to allow for, to make sure that we weren't disrupting the health of what was going on beneath the soil. With the next slide, you can kind of see this is from the motor court again, just a little bit of a closer picture about how close we were rubbing up against the structure of the house. Going to the next slide, you could see here's a great little photo of us on the job site early in the process with the client, the contractor, the arborist, literally looking up and ensuring that the health of the tree, and we were doing everything in our power to make sure that we weren't jeopardizing what we were really building around. So kind of a fun photo there of what's going on site. And then this last photo during construction just really reflects a little bit of the gymnastics that our team had to undergo with the structural engineer. You can see where, you know, just even the structural beams, how they cantilevered out. And ultimately, just as we were laying those things up with the tree in place, they were cut back several feet because, again, there was a limb that needed to be kept because it was a primary limb. So again, just being able to work on site and being very sensitive to just ensuring that we could maintain the primary elements of the tree as long as we can was critically important. So, okay. So Grant, I think we'll be talking about process here in the next slide.
So in terms of, we're just about to show you some of the site plan, floor plan, some of the goodies here. But as we developed the design for this process, it was interesting for us to learn that, as I mentioned before, the client actually had hired a few different architects locally, and they were building what essentially was a traditional home on the property. They were designing that. They visited a friend's home down on the beach that was done by Wally Cunningham. You all probably know Wally's work, really outstanding architect. And it was a very contemporary home, and it got them thinking a little bit. They tried another architect locally, and they weren't quite getting there. And then that's when Damon, the landscape architect, and who used to work with us as well, and he said, you know, I have some folks in LA. I know it's LA, but I think you should talk to them. And that's how we got involved. So we approached, as I said before, the site as a blank canvas and really took a look at not just how we were going to weave within the trees, but how we were going to kind of reverse the script. There's a couple of photos here of us marking out the project on the site, meeting on the site. We would have these big meetings where we pull the tables out and present the ideas. We even, you can see in the upper left-hand corner, we brought a lift to the site one day and brought them up and down and exploring different views and whatnot.
Yeah, it was a real, just to add to that, Grant, it was a real blessing to have a client that was extremely engaged and passionate about the process. As I'm sure many of you know, it completely changes the complexion and the dynamic of the design process. And to a T, they soaked up every last bit of it. So,
yeah, there was actually at one point where our client, she leans over and she looks at her husband when he's looking at our initial renderings, and they were pretty giddy when they saw it. And they also saw what was a home that they weren't exactly thinking about before. And she turned to her husband and she said, "I don't think our friends think we had this in us." So we always kind of kid her about that. That was a fun quote for us. Okay, so on to the site floor plans and some of the architectural drawings.
Yeah, so here, just kind of using the opportunity to get everybody oriented a little bit and maybe better understand a little bit of our site approach. Like Grant mentioned, one of the unique perspectives that we take, as architects and landscape architects within our firm is that when we look at a property, we're looking at it property line to property line, and quite honestly beyond. I mean, many of our projects and properties are blessed with amazing view opportunities and other contextual benefits. And so this project, no different, given that the estate scale and given what is pretty much a very unique site. And so in looking at this thing, property to property line, what it did was it allowed us to really consider and equally prioritize what are these beautiful indoor outdoor rooms, or outdoor rooms equally with these indoor spaces. And quite honestly, all those beautiful transition spaces in between, which are those covered outdoor living areas that we all love, especially here in Southern California. And as a response to that, that really helped kind of lead us into an opportunity where we were able to explore a very unique dynamic form for what is, an interesting trapezoidal property. Typically you could imagine somebody would probably take an approach where we would just try to put an architectural structure in the middle, and then we would develop the site around it in almost a resultant space. But what this layout here shows you just very quickly and graphically is that we took an opportunity to really extend the house in many different directions into different corners of the property. And given the specific topography that we had to play with, it really allowed us to create some very unique, interesting indoor-outdoor relationships and connections to the view that we otherwise didn't have. And as you can see, as we get into a few other photos, it really lent itself to what we think is a very unique project, in addition to just considering the two cork trees that are really kind of the primary elements of the site. Joyce, if you could maybe just show real quickly. So the two cork trees, the one big one that Grant was mentioning before is Joyce is kind of cursoring it there. And then there's the other one on the other side, which is a smaller cork tree. So you can see just using those as an opportunity, we were able to thread in between the house in a way where it was really embracing the history and the magnitude of what was currently there to begin with. Beyond that, the design point of view, at least in terms of our site planning approach that was unique for this project, was the current house was a traditional home that was essentially situated in the middle of the property. And the motor court, or at least the way that the previous owner accessed the site, was on the view side, if you can imagine. So between the oval that is currently there, which was previously the tennis court that Grant showed you in the aerial photograph, there was a significant round motor court, and then the house sat back behind it. And as we kind of began this process, our first intuition was just to kind of, again, work with that scenario. It's what the clients had known for so many different years, and it just seemed like kind of a given. But as we kind of took a closer look at it, and after getting just kind of working the site plan, our breakthrough was to consider moving the motor court and accessing the site in a different way, kind of reversing the script, similar to what Grant was mentioning before, which allowed us to create an entry sequence in a motor court that was coming off of the rear of the property, if you could imagine, which thereby allowed for the entire body of the house to be able to front the view on the left, and of course, take advantage of the ocean view. So we were able to, in that kind of small stroke, entirely shift and flip this property around to allow to get the kind of the functional aspect of the motor court and accessing the property and not having to be in the middle of the view towards the back, and quite honestly, the back of house program. So what Joyce is kind of pointing to right now is at the access point of the property and where the motor court is, we extended what is a beautiful kind of romantic drive. Because one of the things that's really critical for us, especially when we're given the beautiful opportunity to take advantage of a site that this is large, is to really exaggerate, if you can imagine, the arrival experience, and which is very different than what they had before, which was literally coming off the curb and then coming onto the motor court and into the garage. So taking the opportunity to exaggerate that arrival experience and coming onto the property and having it feel like, wow, I'm home, was an important part to telling the story of how one arrived on this property. And again, just taking advantage of some very odd, unique corners of the entire property. So if looking on to the next slide, we'll just flip through these real quickly. These are a handful of beautiful, just quick graphic elevations showing conceptually the representation of the house, which is again, a very beautiful horizontally lined home that reaches into the far corners of the property, and in a very simple contextual way has this beautiful wood box that literally hovers across the landscape. If you go to the second slide there, the idea about the wood box literally bridging, if you can imagine, the property, like in the lower image there, is pretty relevant. You can see how there's a great room, which we'll take a closer look at it, which essentially has double-sided glass walls on both sides that is completely transparent, and on any given day is completely open. So there was a sensitivity in terms of even our massing that wanted that, even though that we could have taken a very heavy-handed approach and created a very heavy structure, we wanted the house to feel light on the property, and hence the idea of floating the second story wood volume above the plaster volumes that are on the lower level. So Next slide, I think, is a similar photo. In fact, actually, here's one area that we'll be talking about a little bit later. Was exciting was, giving it a little bit of an interesting, unique opportunity, at least on one end, where the hillside rides up, coming from that oval lawn that we looked at in the site plan, giving it this wow moment where the living room just kind of reaches out and hovers across the landscape below, just to kind of give us an interesting panorama there that we'll take a look at a little closer later. Okay, next slide. And again, just another view of a site section there from the other side. Okay, back
So
to you,
we'll
Grant.
start getting into some of the photographs here. This this is the new entry that Duan was describing. It's essentially on the eastern side of the property, comes off the street and through a large concrete portal with a beautiful wood sliding door, and it sets up the procession. Because we're moving from an entry of the property on the view side to the other side of the property, we were basically creating a new procession of ceremony in arrival. And then the next couple pictures we'll see are part of that as well.
Yeah, so the first symbol of that procession was this beautiful porte cochere, which is an extension of the body of the house. And obviously these shots were taken closer to twilight, just because for us, it was a really great opportunity to kind of show and convey, taking the opportunity to do something unique. Our clients were always looking for kind of low-key ways, in a way, to celebrate the architecture without being too gaudy. And so we were able to work with an extremely talented lighting designer, KGM, which I think many of you probably know here in Los Angeles. So they came up with this wonderful idea where we would be able to essentially uplight that entire porte cochere without having downlights. And so in the evening, as you can imagine, it just creates this very warm entry ambiance as it kind of leads into the next element of the motor court.
Yeah, and so if you'll recall, as we move to the next photograph here, as we enter this motor court, we're pinching the view off to the ocean, which is pretty dramatic. But we're also revealing the system of horizontal and vertical layers that are making up the architecture. So we're basically providing some new drama. And you can see the floating wood upstairs that Duan was referencing to. And in the next image, as you get a little bit closer to the entry, which is that opening in the concrete up the steps, you'll see that we're giving a peekaboo view to the ocean. We're purposely just giving a little tantalizing of what's to come as you have arrived, but you don't get the full picture yet. That happens when you enter the home. To the right is that large sliding gate, which actually covers the garage, but also opens the backyard up to the motor court for larger events and more casual events. And then off to the lower left is a fountain that mimics the arrival of the steps and spills off towards the ocean. Maybe our small attempt at a Salk effect here, which is just down the street. Yeah.
Great. And then as far as the motor court goes, again, this was probably the first real opportunity for us to think of, again, an outdoor room. It's not just a motor court. It's just not a place to drop your car off or, go into the garage or enter the house, but it really wants to have a sense of space. And so, working with our landscape architect, Michael McGowan, Michael came up with this beautiful sense of just kind of this very urban, minimalistic garden that was really punctuated by this beautiful Japanese black pine and a found granite boulder that we brought in. The contrast between this and what happens obviously behind the concrete wall is quite different, where it's a lot more luxurious and a lot more green. And so this was a really great opportunity to kind of take a distinctive point of view that we wanted to be a little more spare at this stage, and just let the architecture and this one beautiful black pine really just stand on its own, and just kind of be the feature element in the entire motor court. Moving to the next slide, the front door was also a beautiful area that we wanted to focus on. There's a lot of ways to play this up, but I think our team did a really great job in terms of just kind of setting up that whole entry sequence and And in a very subtle way, again, just using the form and the elements of the house and the materiality to really just kind of signify that welcome home. This is, this is kind of the place where you enter. And so small moves, which were just kind of let the wood blocks above just float out slightly enough, which is about a 10-foot cantilever in order to give yourself the necessary cover to go in. You can actually see the little detail there on the left image where we actually snuck in a 2-foot layer, 2-foot tall bit of glass, if you can imagine, so that in the evening, and you'll see in a couple subsequent twilight shots where the wood box just completely hovers above the beautiful board form wall. Again, minimizing the barriers between indoor and outdoor. We opted for a glass wall that essentially, the glass door just essentially goes away, and even looking out from the house to the outside, it's just beautiful green. And then to Grant's point earlier, just been a very quiet but beautiful, tranquil nod to just bringing the water element in terms of how it connects to the and how it connects to the site and the ocean beyond.
And yes, I just took a picture of our own work. I got an idea.
There we go.
Okay, so moving on here, as we get a little into the house, basically that hovering upstairs wood volume spans over 2 linear cores on each of the north and south sides, and it opens just glass up in between for the great room, the kitchen, dining, and living area, which flows out onto a terrace on the ocean side and a large lawn and the pool on the inland side. You can see the large cork oak on the left. You can catch a hint up top on how we actually scalloped that bar to allow that tree to again be the priority. Moving to the next one, the notions of the indoor-outdoor flow of water were very important. So the actual stair that connects the 2 levels is part of a shaft of water that permeates the house from the back to the front. And then the next slide is a close-up look at the scallop for the cork oak from above. And the picture on the left is, of course, the original house. So we're basically looking at the same tree as we look to the right for the new area. Let's see. Yeah, let's head to the great room.
Yeah, so the great room is in many ways ground zero as far as the interior of the space. It's the typical layout, which includes kind of the casual living area with the dining area and then also the kitchen. For our clients, they really wanted this particular space to feel very communal and very casual. And so there's really no pretense to it. The color tones of the space and just even allowing for the indoors and the outdoors to connect was of prominent importance. This particular view is looking towards the east. The ocean is behind us, and we'll see a view of that in a minute. But you can see how we took, we designed those walls, the glass walls, to essentially be, instead of walls with windows in them, essentially they're walls of glass. And so there's amazing level of transparency and just connectivity to both ends of the property. Small little trick that we also employ a lot with walls of glass is designing for a clear storage system that sits above the door systems. And what that does, as you can imagine, is, during times of inclement weather, when it's not appropriate to have the doors completely open, the clients have an opportunity to be able to open the clear stories above and get a beautiful, very passive cross ventilation that, quite honestly, we've been in there a few times where it actually makes the room cold, if you could believe it or not, just be able to kind of operate it at that level. Again, very, in terms of the concept of the house, we have the floating wood box above, which allowed for us to bring the wood tongue and groove cedar ceiling through, which gives us a natural warmth to this particular room, given the stone floors and a handful of other things. And then bookending this space, and we'll see again some images that better show it, but there's essentially 2 cores which conceptually hold up the wood box, and those are made of dry stacked limestone that also hold a series of mechanical and other functional spaces. Some of you might be wondering what the cabinetry is. That's walnut, and walnut was in large part the material species of choice that we used not only for a lot of the cabinetry, but for the stairs and a few other very important architectural elements, as we'll see as we kind of go through. On the next slide, it's taking a look the other way. And again, here, just seeing the kitchen and the dining table in our primary view. A little bit further beyond there, you can actually see the smaller cork tree that bookends the body of the house. And it quite honestly just rubs up against the house, you know, getting as close as we can and just having it feel very connected. Again, minimal palette and just kind of keeping the lines very clean. We had a really wonderful interior designer on the project. Her name was Pamela Smith. She's out of San Diego, and she did an amazing job, quite honestly, in working with our clients in ensuring that this home ultimately felt like a warm contemporary home versus a modern, cold contemporary home, and which was a concern of theirs originally, given just this huge endeavor of going towards something that was a lot more contemporary than what they were previously used to. But there were small touches that she brought to the table, such as this beautiful custom designed live edge walnut table that really is kind of the heart of where all the Thanksgiving dinners and everything are going to be. It provides a sense of organic sensibility to an otherwise but potentially more stiff architecture. And even just bringing colors of the brass the chandelier in, which is a Lindsay Adelman chandelier. Really, again, just play off the color tones of the house, of the wood, of the wall, and of the ceiling above, but providing a softness to the entirety of the space that really just ultimately balanced itself out and made our clients very comfortable and excited about what they had. Next view, just a couple different shots again, a view of the kitchen to the left, and then a view of the living room to the right. And you can see conceptually, again, the limestone stacked core that houses probably the biggest TV that at least I think we've seen in a long time. This was actually a custom TV. Our client is, at least during the process, became a significant audiophile. And so this, as we all know, our clients every once in a while kind of get those hobbies. And it was just, I think, an opportunity for him to buy a 100+ custom TV. But at the end of the day, it became a beautiful element, and you can actually see on the TV what is his kind of screensaver. So it's this moving piece of art screensaver that really helps kind of, again, just soften the space and doesn't make that space look like or at least look like a TV when it's in the off position. So the next slide is just some secondary spaces. Well, the kitchen on the left, obviously, and then behind the kitchen, there's a sliver within our limestone box, which is this butler's pantry. And again, just, connecting to the views beyond. In this particular instance, you see the smaller of the cork trees that's just, perfectly framed right along there, and just using that opportunity to kind of bring some level of art and nature into what would otherwise be a very functional butler's pantry that might not naturally get much love during the process. So. Okay, jumping around the house a little bit, one area that we're going to be looking at are the two stairs of the property. The first stair, and Joyce is kind of showing you there in terms of the floor plan, closer to the entryway, there's what we call the secret stair. And this was a stair element that our client, he definitely has this adventurous spirit in him. And so he challenges to find an opportunity for him to have almost kind of a James Bond secret door passageway. And so we were able to kind of trick this thing in, as you can see kind of in the next slide, behind the concrete wall. And you can see on the right image, there's a pair of French doors and this is the open position. When they open, it allows you to kind of see beyond. And then there's this 4-foot sliver vertical element that you can see on the left side that is the secret stair that allows him to kind of go between the dining room down below up to his office above. So for him, this was just a kind of a fun opportunity for us to explore, again, some unique crevices of the house and what otherwise probably would have just been mechanical space or something a little bit more functional and maybe appropriate. He really challenged us to kind of come up with these very interesting found locations of the house that, again, just are little areas of creativity and bring light in and are an opportunity to just kind of admire. So the next slide, and Grant will talk you through, is kind of the spiral staircase, which is the gem here.
Now for something completely different.
Exactly.
Yeah, the main stair for the house, which you caught a glimpse of before, is actually a very sculptural element. The home is quite orthogonal, and we looked at this as a counterbalance opportunity to bring in a little bit of a more sculptural, organic type of shape. The stair is interesting because we got inspired. Our client's basically a biotech engineer and entrepreneur who has worked closely with many DNA related technologies. So you can kind of see the double helix DNA inspiration in the stair. He was a little floored that we took that quite literally, but we built a model and showed them not only the fact that it would be a really beautiful contrasting element in the home, but that it also is quite functional to get you from one floor to the other. So just a couple of shots showing that space in the different water elements. The next photograph is actually just looking straight up through the oculus above from the stair below. So we had some fun with it. And this stair leads to the next space, which is the library and loft. Okay.
Okay, so reorienting everyone again. So we'll be going to the master suite. And so the master suite is on the north side of the property there. It's closer to the pool. And it was meant to kind of be a little bit of an offshoot to the body of the house. You can see, at least within the site plan and with the subsequent photos, the notion of around, at least with the site development of the landscape or of the around the master suite, was that it was meant to be a little more intimate, a little bit more cozy. So much of this house is about these, grand horizontal panoramas and vistas that connect you not only to the yard in the rear, but also to this amazing Pacific Ocean view to the west. This was an opportunity for us to really kind of start thinking a little bit more so about some more intimate, cozy spaces. So jumping to the next slide, this is an image of the master bedroom itself. And the master bedroom was interestingly designed almost in almost like a smaller version of the great room, which has the double glass walls on each side. It's hard to see the glass wall that's on the left side, but imagine that this bedroom has two glass walls, and here we're just seeing a little bit more that's on the right side. The clients just had this, again, just strong desire to feel connected and to get as much natural light and ventilation as possible. And so on this particular area, you can see hints of what we'll be looking at next, which is this beautiful master Zen courtyard. And this was, if you go to the next slide, a beautifully curated space that our landscape architect, Michael McGowan, came up with. Our clients have had an affinity to Asian and Japanese architecture, and in particular, he had this fantasy very early on. I mean, I think I can still remember it, Grant. The first meeting, the Japanese soaking tub was uttered before a lot of the other more important spaces. And so in a large way, this space really came out of the idea of, okay, I want a Japanese soaking tub. How do I do it? What do we need to do in order to make it thoughtful and purposeful? So we had this really wonderful opportunity that, like I mentioned, Michael, our landscape architect, really kind of took on. And it's this beautiful, intimate space that has, a tranquil koi pond element in it, which really acts as this beautiful buffer between the indoor and the outdoor space. And then when you go to the next slide, you'll see some early sketches that Michael had done. You can imagine he probably went through several dozen different versions of this, but this was an exploration sketch that he had done for our clients to really, again, explore the elements that come into play in a beautiful Japanese garden. The proportions of the space, the views, the vistas, the materiality, and even the vistas of how the landscaping wanted to come into play with that given space were very well orchestrated. And we're exceptionally grateful to have somebody as talented as Michael on board, who comes with that background and took this thing to the T's. And our clients couldn't be more happy about it. So next slide. Image again on the right here just shows the beautiful koi pond, very subtle, minimal element. The statue that's at the end there is, again, just a little bit of a legacy of what they had previously. Um, uh, this particular bronze statue, her name is Kuan Yin. And apparently she's a Buddhist deity. And I think they purchased her maybe, several decades ago when they traveled to China. And it's just been part of their house. And so when we designed this house for them, it was again of a particular interest to ensure that Kuan Yin had a particular place in the house. And for them, they felt very good about having it close to the master suite, closer to their hearts. And so again, we just designed this entire space to really allow for that to happen. On the left side is just a great opportunity to maybe explore different things. So again, trying to make that connection with the indoor outdoor, but we took a different and perhaps maybe a more graceful approach in terms of how we access the site. Michael came up with this beautiful idea of just bringing some boulders to the property and then setting them up in a very natural, organic way that wasn't as heavy-handed and a little bit softer in terms of how the house or the master bedroom opened out onto the site beyond. So just a great way to kind of balance the bedroom off of itself. Okay.
So yeah, looking at the site plan again, what we'll do is we'll head out to the main living area, and you can see off to the left the oval court surrounded by olive trees. That's where the original tennis court was. They didn't desire to keep the tennis court, mostly because they're looking over it towards the view. So, it's a bit noisy from a view perspective, visually noisy. So what Damon Hine had done before we arrived is he had conceived of a court there, a really serene space that they could do gatherings, etc., but also that it would be sort of calm. And as we come to the next photographs, we'll see that what we did is we took the living room and we literally just shot it right out over that. We cantilevered this living room about, 18 plus feet, right?
At least.
Yeah, and so it's really a great space because you're hovered over this beautiful olive-lined garden, but also over the horizon, over the town and the Pacific Ocean below. Joyce, if you can flip to the next ones, we'll see from inside that space, you kind of get that feeling, and it's really very provocative. We like to create a sense of levitation in our projects, and this was a fun opportunity to feel like you're really hovering out there. Yeah, and then moving on to some of the other ancillary spaces.
Yeah, so the last area of the house that we'll be visiting is the recreation room, and Grant or Joyce is pointing to it there. It's essentially the back end of it is the port cochere and the garage of the property, but on the front end, which is the side that kind of opens onto the backyard, it's a rec room, which also has an outdoor kitchen. So going to the slide after this one, you can see an image of what that looks like, kind of standing back at the pool and looking back towards the recreation room. The motor court is behind the board form concrete wall there, but for us, it was really important, again, just to pay homage to the long horizontal lines of the property. We were challenged early on from our client to try to maximize square footage and put a second story guest house, if you can imagine, above that rec room. But again, ultimately, I think he appreciated the integrity of what we were trying to do with the form of the house. The next slide.
One condom out of
it. That's right. I just showed him some really horrible second story designs and it worked. This is a little bit of a closer view. And the thing that's probably catching your eye there is that 1.5-story concrete volume. And the funny story about that was, about halfway or more than 3/4 of the way through the design of this particular area, our client just had this affinity where he needed to have this pizza oven. And as many of you guys know, integrating a pizza oven is not an easy thing, given just all the logistics and the flue and the scale and the fire clearance that it needed to have. And so I have to admit, I'll be honest, I remember to this day, and something that I'll always take with me is he told us to embrace the challenge of putting a pizza oven in. And so our design team went to work and we came up with this idea to essentially encase it in a bore form concrete element for obviously for fire resistance, but also then to just have a little fun and loosen up the form a little bit. And so we just treated it as this beautiful vertical element that kind of pokes up above the beautiful horizontal roof, and then even the board form concrete wall beyond. And in many ways, it almost became a little bit of the iconic moment of the house, which is, again, this almost a unique response to a client's desire to just get a pizza oven into his outdoor kitchen area. So going to the next slide, again, our intention here is just to create this beautiful seamless indoor-outdoor environment, just letting the material finishes. The floor is made of Portuguese limestone, just blend indoor to outdoor, and just getting the thresholds to literally go away. And then in this particular image, you can see just playing with some of the geometry and the lines that that we were able to play with, given the roof and also the bocce court down below, and then just letting that green hedge go beyond. The next photo is a shot that's taken a little bit more from the inside. And again, our interior designer did an amazing job. She created a very kind of calm, muted palette, but still warm, and one that really allowed the colors of the interior space to really play well with the natural colors that were going on outside, and just finding that beautiful Zen balance.
So before we show you a video of the project, we've got a fun little video we're going to walk you through. We'll just take you through a couple last details here. This is a shot where a particular moment of the architecture comes out to meet a third cork oak tree. It's a little bit closer to the street and creates a kind of a fun, serene moment and a little bit of a man and nature connection there. The next couple of photographs, the one on the right is the master suite, which Duan had shown before. It hovers lightly over the garden. And the one on the left is a closer shot of the entry with the water feature and the volume upstairs, which Duan had also referenced with the glowing light from the outside. And then a couple other shots you backed up a little bit on the left there with that entry, and a shot straight through at a dusk hour of the great room on the right. And then one more picture here is the ocean side of the home in the evening, the master suite on the left, and you can see the cantilevered living room on the far right. So coming up here, we've got a little video. Hopefully it will play nicely and give you guys a slightly more in-depth tour through the house.
Okay. Just you can go ahead and play it there.
Okay, thank you, Joyce. Thanks for steering us through everything. So that is it for us. There's a little model shot here at the end, one of the several models we've produced to try to get it all right. But we will turn it back to you, Karine, and if there's any questions.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful home and beautiful presentation. You guys really had great pacing. I know I said that to you, but it really was, I think it just also with the home, you guys kind of, your pacing of this today went along with the design of the home as well. Um,
Right.
so if anybody has any questions, we have about 5 minutes. We would love for any of your questions to get addressed. You can put your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. I'm not going to push it too much tonight just because there is a Dodgers game that I'm sure that everyone wants to get to, including Grant. But
I did mention that, but I was kidding.
no, I know.
We'll be fine.
Just in case you guys forgot. Anyway, but my only one comment, which I have to say, is that I just want to say thank you for saving the trees. I think that a lot of work goes into that. I know that even with my parents' home where I grew up in, my parents grew up in the country. And so when they came home one day to the construction site, my mom came home to them. They had bulldozed half of the trees of the lot down. And she just started screaming, and she was able to protect half of the lot. So I grew up with half grass, half like completely wooded area, which was perfect.
Wow.
So
Well,
yeah,
one quick comment on that.
Yeah.
I will tell you, because you reminded me, this is hard to believe, but when we came onto the project, an arborist had told our client that the major cork oak was diseased and was probably not going to make it. And I remember standing there, Dwan. I remember thinking to myself, you got to be kidding me. This tree has been here for several hundred years, and it just so happens that right now it's not going to make it. I don't buy it. So it took months and months, but we said, let's, look, if the tree doesn't make it, okay, we'll figure something. We'll come up with another one, but we can't take this tree down. And so I think there was a little bit of destiny involved as well.
Right.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. So Renee has a question. Renee, you can unmute yourself and elaborate. She was wondering about the art on the walls. Was there any specific art you were wondering about?
No, I'm just saying that thank you for sharing such a beautiful project, but having floor to ceiling glass and then all these beautiful rich wood wall finishes doesn't leave a lot of room for art on the walls. And I saw the art behind the bar in the rec room. I don't know, whatever. I saw that, but there, and the niche, of course, for the sculpture, but I often find those competing interests. And did that ever come up? How do you reconcile some of that? No. Okay, there you go.
Juwan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, it's a great question. For our clients, and actually there were obviously a handful of other shots of this house that aren't as wide open. There's a handful of dens and there's a dining area that actually have a few of their more sensitive art, ones that I think would definitely be more of a concern with as much natural light. The art that you saw, it was a beautiful tapestry in the bar area. That was something that I had purchased recently, and there wasn't a really strong connection there for them in terms of, worrying that it would fade after time. For them, they like to celebrate the art, but it's not necessarily something where they have ultra high expensive Picasso, so to speak. They actually have a lot of their artwork beyond things that they have found in their travels are things that the family has, meaning kids' artwork, family photos. It's stuff of that. They're for the most part they're fairly modest, and a lot of those again are a little bit more of the private areas that aren't really as part of this video. But it was definitely a good point in terms of just kind of how the light works.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, Renee, and answer your question, we're often confronted with that. Art is sometimes our clients' one of their top priorities. Sometimes maybe their top priority. As we all know, we have clients who art collections are part of the family. And when you're designing a home that is also blessed with a great location and panoramic views, And of course, we have things like entertainment and fireplaces. There's a lot of challenges. So it just depends, some homes, and we're actually working on a home with a client that is an extensive art collection, and it's a little bit more about the balance of the gallery and the views. And oftentimes, we always say when we're working on projects, most of them have some sort of, precious views, but we like to both enhance panorama. I mean, always having, maximizing the views in certain locations, but we also like to portal the views, and it's a balance of both. Right. And so if we're creating panoramic views and we're supplementing those in different areas with framed views, then that makes both of them more interesting rather than just glass and panorama everywhere. And it subsequently also allows for, more art. But it's always a challenge, and it's always a balance. It's a great question.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. Carlo has a good question, as he always does, and he can unmute himself, but I'm sure he just wants me to ask it. Besides the trees, what was the other biggest challenge? Was it the Japanese soaking tub, or the dealing with any AV demands? If you had to find an AV specialist for him?
Oh, it was absolutely the client. If we didn't have to have no, I'm sorry. We're all just architects.
You're unmuted
there. No, honestly, we were blessed with really great clients here, and I would have to say, Dwan, that I think we had a little bit of a challenge with the start in terms of the right contractor. There was a contractor that was on board, and our client subsequently decided to shift gears very early on, and it was quite a blessing and quite an insight on his part. Our contractor ended up being a real advocate for many of the things from a detail and quality standpoint that a house of this nature needs. And he was really an important part of the process to allow the client to understand the priority and the necessity of some of the constructability methods that got us to where we were. Yeah, other than that, I don't know, we oftentimes would have to say the interior designer was a challenge, but Pamela she was amazing. By the way, Pam Smith, if you look her up, she doesn't have a website, but she is married to Wallace Cunningham. So again, San Diego's a fairly small very small but potent architectural community, and Wally Cunningham is a real, one of the real gems there. And we were lucky that they knew him and knew his wife and decided to have her come aboard. And she really from day one was a proponent of this house staying clean and minimalist but warm. And I think we were both and continue to be both really excited about her addition and her input and coming up with some really great things. She was also, and I think, Dwan, you alluded to this, she was a great agent for the client who, as you recall, I mentioned, have lived in a traditional home for 30 years and started this process with the traditional home. And so there was a certain need at times for them to be comforted that the house wasn't going to be too cold. And she was an agent in that process.
Absolutely.
Do you guys have time for 2 more questions?
Sure.
Sure. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Renee has another question. Renee, if you just want to unmute yourself, and then we have a question from Jan, and then we'll see the next.
Great.
Renee?
I was just also wondering about environmental certification. Is it LEED or Passive House, or what sort of, I mean, obviously it's an enormous house would be one consideration, but what were the considerations about the environment?
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Dwan, I'm sure you could add to it.
Sure.
I will tell you that, We haven't actually gone for LEED certification on our projects for quite a while now. We used to, but we, as you know, we were confronted with a lot of challenges in that arena. There are a lot of aspects to environmentally sensitive and minimal footprint types of considerations that we like to employ, but actually the LEED process. I mean, if we're not near a bus stop and several other things, it's hard. So a couple different things, and we could talk about this forever, but in a nutshell, most of our homes like this one employ just about all the things that really have an impact. For instance, geothermal heating and cooling, the photovoltaic systems, which you saw there in the videos, gray water recirculation, although we don't have that on this project in particular, and FSC certified and other certified materials. But we also like to think that when we are doing a project, these homes are legacy homes. They're heirlooms. They're built by contractors with a level of quality that we demand, that make them last for generations. And if you ever really do the math on a home that lasts for as many generations as a home like this will last, I think we'd find the carbon footprint would have quite a calc behind it. It would be amazing. And basically, I mean, look, we do homes that are shooting the moon, and as you said, they're often large. But if they're built with quality to last literally lifetimes and generations, that might end up being, you get one shot at it. Everybody comes, everybody leaves. The house is there for hopefully as long as we know. So.
Yeah. And just to add to what Grant mentioned, several other considerations that we brought to the table aside from the systems was just smart design in terms of passive energy systems. Just the idea about having clear story windows to allow for natural ventilation to be able to cool down the house most, if not the entire time of the year. Sun shading devices. Even in some instances, we gave them an opportunity to specify recycled jeans for insulation. Many of you probably have seen that, believe it or not. You can recycle that. So there's literally blue jeans in the walls of the house that serve as really great insulation. Again, deep overhangs, the kit and caboodle, everything there, just to kind of go along with the systems that Grant mentioned, like geothermal and solar, really helped at least minimize the impact of potentially what would be construed as a 10,000 square foot home. So it's fairly light, and in many ways it actually is almost off the grid during the summer months with solar. So which was something that our client was extremely happy and proud about. So.
Thank you for explaining that. Jan, do you want to address your question to the group?
I was wondering if while the project was under construction or way into design, if you found something at site when maybe when you're excavating or when you just started construction and a design change came along and sort of serendipitously and it inspired and it stuck and you were actually happy about it, or was the house built exactly like how you envisioned and everything was all pre-planned and nothing changed?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, there always is, right? I mean, especially I think with homes where you have, there's a little more intimacy and passion involved in owner-user connection. I would say the one that comes to mind the most here would be something that we did not show during this presentation, which not far from where you saw the scallop of the wood bar for the canopy of the large cork oak. There's another area where the garage wing heads out. And as we were under construction, we realized we were either taking a major limb of that tree off or we were redesigning. And the bottom line is we made a divot. We cut out what would you say, Juan, maybe a 2 by 4 foot deep section of the back hallway of the garage. And literally we carved it out and sort of celebrated it. It's an odd moment coming down the little gallery, but we inserted glass and it's it's just a complete little homage to a very large cork oak branch. And it turned out to be, as you were saying, it's serendipitous fun.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I think the one area that we kind of went back and forth was the cantilever living room that Grant kind of walked us through. So below the cantilever, so the integrity of that space is to let this beautiful glass volume just pop out over top of the natural landscape. And we went back and forth with our amazing client, literally all the way to the end, because he wanted to at least excavate below that and just make that a game room that opened out to the oval below. And for us, that was a little bit of challenging the integrity of having what there was a beautiful cantilevered living room, and essentially what made that look like a 2-story space. So ultimately he accommodated our request to at least maintain it as such, and decided not to develop and daylight the entire basement there below the living room. So.
Yeah, thanks. Fun question.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. It always adds so much, and it makes us feel like, and it helps the presenters and myself feel like we're actually talking to someone, and we know you're here and listening. But thank you so much to Grant and Dwan and Joyce for putting this presentation together. Fun working with you guys, and excited to see what's next.